All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 255. And today, I needed a drink. So, today, I'm exhausted because yesterday, brain was not being nice to me. And as a method of dealing with my negative emotions in a more positive way, I decided to do my in-depth review for the Player's Handbook. It is over a 3-hour long video. But it was nice. I get to go into a lot of details. I go over every single class and the changes and what I think about them. It's fine. It's over 7 gigs. So it's going to take me forever to upload the damn thing. But it's not what I wanted to talk about. There has been a war. No. There has been arguments since, to be perfectly honest, since the 1D&D playtests. There have been arguments about whether D&D 5.5, which is what we're going to call it, whether D&D 5.5 was going to be an upgrade or a downgrade. And in my comments, people have been talking about it as well. And a lot of people are basically using the term Nerfs and Buffs. If you're not familiar with this term, it comes from MMOs. Basically what it is in an MMO, every class has a different set of abilities, obviously. And they're designed to work in a certain way. However, it's not how players use them. And they will find that there are always unexpected side effects that they didn't expect when real people start using them. And so they have to make changes. And so Nerfs and Buffs is basically when something changes, if it gets less powerful, it's considered a nerf. And if it gets more powerful, it's considered a buff. And in MMOs, this works perfectly because 9 times out of 10, the changes that they make are numerical changes. By sitting there and going, well, we've reduced the damage of this ability by 20%. It's super easy to be able to say, well, that is a nerf. It does less damage than before. Same thing is true about buffs. There's very few times in an MMO when they make a change that you can't quantify it as either a positive change or a negative change, because in MMOs, everything is about damage numbers. That's how it works. It's all about damage numbers. It's healing damage numbers, stopping damage numbers, causing damage numbers. And so because everything is quantified in an MMO, everything is either a nerf or a buff. In tabletop RPGs, it just doesn't work that way. There are no nerfs or buffs in tabletop RPGs because nothing is defined solely by its ability to do damage. There are always going to be alternate uses because tabletop RPGs are not video games. That's why you need a dungeon master to be able to play D&D, because you have to have someone that can logically figure out what happens when you do something that's not written in the rules. And video games can't do that. Anything you do in a video game has to be something that the devs thought of beforehand. Unless you start using glitches and the things like that. And those are quite literally just mistakes and the game breaking. Sometimes the glitches are beneficial, so they're happy mistakes, but they're still mistakes. It's one of the reasons why I always have a chuckle when people claim that 4th edition was just a video game. It was in no way, shape, or form a video game. 3rd edition is a video game because 3rd edition is a permissive system. There's a rule for everything, and if there isn't a rule, you can't do it. 3rd edition is a video game. It's one of the reasons why there are so many video games that basically used 3rd edition. Knights of the Old Republic is 3rd edition Star Wars. Like it's literally uses the D20 system. They actually have the same feats in there. Like it's D&D in space. And there are a lot of really, really great 3rd edition video games. Like there are. Just hands down, they're great. because 3rd edition is a video game. Anyway, so getting back to this idea, 5.5 isn't a nerf or a buff. It's not a combination of nerfs or buffs. It is changes. A really good example of this is the Barbarian. They fundamentally changed how the Barbarian works. No, they didn't. They did. Listen. The 5.0 version of the Barbarian is a very simple class to play. The reason being, most of the upgrades to the class are what are considered passives, meaning you don't make a choice to use them, they just work. Rage, as much as technically, yes, you do have to use a bonus action to activate it, depending on how many combats you get into a day, for the most part, it's a passive thing. All the benefits of Rage are passive. You don't actually have to do anything other than turn it on for them to work. You get extra damage automatically. You take less damage automatically. You get advantage on strength checks automatically. None of this is a choice. It's just there. Brutal Critical was passive. You didn't choose to use it. It was passive. Even Reckless Attack, as much as technically it was a choice, for most people it wasn't. They just treated it as barbarians get advantage on all their attacks. It's how it worked. So the old, and even when you look at some of the subclasses stuff, like the Totem Barbarian, Bear, you take less damage whenever you're raging. Wolf, other people get advantage, but not you. Everything was very, very passive. It made it a very simple class to play. And it actually made it a pretty good class for new players. The new version of the Barbarian is active. And you can see it even in just the Rage. The way Rage used to be sustained is if you took damage, that was it. Passive. You have no choice over whether you take damage. It's whether the bad guys attack you or not. So sustaining your Rage was a passive thing. Yes, you could also sustain it by attacking and stuff like that. But for the most part, it was a passive thing. That doesn't exist in 5.5. Rage is no longer sustained by damage. You either have to make an attack, force someone to make a saving throw, or you can use your bonus action to extend it. But it is an active ability, not a passive ability anymore. Brutal Strike is an active ability. You have to choose to forego advantage on one of your attacks to get a little bit of extra damage, and then also you have to choose an effect to add to it. The Barbarian is significantly more active. Now, some people, that's a buff. The old class is boring, the new class is interesting. For other people, that's a nerf. I knew what I needed to do, and I could just do it. Whereas the new class, now I have to make choices, and I have to pay attention to the battlefield, and I have to know what everyone else is doing. I can't just really focus on my character anymore. That's a nerf. Neither of those are true. It's just a change. If you want damage numbers, the old version of the Barbarian can out-damage the new version of the Barbarian 100 times out of 100. Not just because of Brutal Critical, but also because of the change they made to Great Weapon Fighter. Like old version of Barbarian, almost every single Barbarian took Great Weapon Fighter, and they did crazy amounts of damage with it, especially when you started adding on Brutal Critical. And if you took the Piercer, one of my players in one of my games, we actually designed her Barbarian around the Piercer. What's it called? The Piercer feat. Oh man, can't even remember words anymore. We designed the character around the Piercer feat because she uses a pike, which is still a D12, but it does piercing damage. And the Piercer feat, whenever you score a critical hit, you get to roll an additional damage die. Well, with Brutal Critical, you get to roll an additional damage die. The only thing we didn't do is make her a half-orc, because with the half-orc, whenever you roll a critical, you get an additional damage to the die. So a half-orc barbarian with the piercer feat, whenever they roll a crit, which when they're rolling with advantage on all their attacks, and especially if they are a berserker barbarian and are getting an extra attack as a bonus action, so they're making 3 attacks per turn, they're critting a lot. And every time they crit, even at just level 9, every time they crit, they're doing 4d12 damage plus rage damage plus their strength modifier. They're doing shit tons of damage, and that's not using Great Weapon Master. And the argument of, well, Great Weapon Master, because of the -5, you were missing you weren't. 100% you weren't. With the advantage from a numerical standpoint, gives you roughly a plus 3.5. So Great Weapon Fighter was really only giving you a -1.5. In theory, the -5 is a detriment. In practice, it's not. You just weren't missing, especially once you got to higher levels. You just weren't missing with Great Weapon Fighter. Yeah, if you want to look at it that way, then 100%. It's the barbarian's job is to do damage. The new version does less damage. It's worse. Well, what about throwing someone off a 200-foot cliff? Then you do 20d6 damage to them. Well, there aren't nerfs and buffs in D&D or in tabletop RPGs in general. And if you're going to be looking at the 5.5 PHB and trying to tally up the number of nerfs versus the number of buffs to try and justify whether it's an upgrade or a downgrade, you're going to fail. Because it's not. There are certain things that there really isn't a benefit for. Like the new version of Paladin Smiting. There's no benefit for that. It is just more difficult to use and less useful. There isn't a way to kind of swing that for the players that it's somehow better. But you can still argue for DMs it's better. And so even something as simple as that, where everything about it is just a downgrade, it makes it more difficult to use, it does less damage, even that you can't really call a nerf, because there are certain people that it's going to be beneficial for. Other martial classes are going to like the fact that paladins can't out-damage them with no effort whatsoever. It's a buff for them. See, it just doesn't work that way. So we need to get out of this nerf buff mentality and look it over as, okay, how does this change the game? And does that allow me to play the way that I want to? And for me, the majority of the changes here are interesting, but they don't allow me to play the way that I want to play. Really good example. My favorite character I've ever played in Dungeons & Dragons, well, I guess second favorite. My absolute favorite character, we only got to play once, but he was massively fun in 4th edition. He was a Sword Mage Avenger hybrid, and he was just massively fun. So that being said, my favorite character in 5th edition is my Shadow Monk Aether. The new version of the rules has a Shadow Monk that can have the criminal background, but it won't play anything like my current Shadow Monk. And the reason being, my current Shadow Monk, because of specifically how I built them, my Shadow Monk is a better rogue than a rogue. What I mean by that is, I built my Shadow Monk to be a rogue. So I took the criminal background. It gives me proficiency in Thieves' Tools. I may not have expertise in Thieves' Tools, but I have a really high dexterity score. So I can pick almost any lock. I can disable almost any trap that I need to. Not difficult. For stealth, I may not have expertise in stealth or reliable talent, but I can cast Pass Without a Trace on myself and give myself a +10 to stealth. So I can out stealth most most rogues until very, very high level. We actually had a game that I played where someone was playing a rogue and I was playing my Shadow Monk, and that person, because they were the only rogue, thought that they could get away with effectively stealing from the party. They were exploring around and kind of scouting ahead, and they found a treasure cache, and they wanted to take it all for themselves. The problem was the way they were going to do that is they noticed it really far off, and they hoped that they noticed it before anyone else. So they were just going to run up to it as fast as possible to be able to take it. And being a hyper perceptive monk, because rogues may be dex based, but monks are dex and wisdom, and I was trained in perception, I saw exactly what was going on. And I said, I'm going to follow him. He goes, I'm faster than you. I said, no, you're not. I can run circles around you. Yeah, but I can dash as a bonus action. I have 45 feet speed. I can teleport 60 feet as a bonus action. And I can dash as a bonus action as well. I am faster than you. So no, you can't get away from me. It's like, well, I can hide. I'm like, and my perception's higher than your stealth, and so can I. But, no. If you want to try... And so, basically, because I saw him do it, I was able to go, hey, are you going to share all of that gold with the rest of the party? Which, here's a fun fact. If you're playing in an organized play league kind of thing, like the D&D Adventures League, don't steal from the party members. It just turns you into a pariah. I don't care if that's what your character would do. Don't do it. So my character was built to be a rogue that was better than a rogue because it was a monk and could run on walls and all these other fun things. And the new version of the monk, I can't do that. I can take the criminal background and get my thieves' tools, but I no longer have the criminal background feature of criminal contacts. That was really, really useful. Now I get, what was it, alert, which is next to useless for my character. Okay. I can now no longer cast Pass Without a Trace. I can't cast Silence, so that I can... I may not be able to sneak attack, but I 100% can cast Silence on someone and then take them out very, very quickly without anyone hearing. Now I can't do that. One of the other things I used constantly at the beginning of the adventuring day for any adventure that I played, I'd go, who can't see in the dark? And then each person, I'd go up to them and I'd cast Dark Vision on them, because Dark Vision lasts for 8 hours and doesn't require concentration. So I'd cast Dark Vision on sometimes the whole party. We would take a 1 hour short rest, and then I would have all my key points, and the entire party would have Dark Vision. So anytime we went somewhere dark, which is where I preferred to be, we never had to use a light source. And so all of my darkness-based abilities, I could always use 100% of the time. It never failed. That can't happen with the new version of the monk. And that's not even considering the changes to Stunning Strike. So, yeah, a lot of people are like, well, monks do more damage now. My job was never to do damage. Like, everybody in my party loved me, and half the time I forgot to roll damage. And the dungeon master would go, how much damage do you do? I go, oh yeah, I have to do damage, don't I? Damage has never been the main focus of the monk. It was useful, but there were so many better things I could do with my turn than figuring out how much damage I did. And no one in my party was upset. And I was never upset, because that wasn't my job in the party. So yeah, they gave slightly more damage to the monk. They gave a few more choices that the monk gets to make without burning focus points now, because key is somehow racist. Yeah. Does that mean I think that the new monk is the worst thing ever and it's the biggest nerf that's ever happened? No. It's different. But I've been playing Aether for 10 years. And now I can't. if I want to use the new rules. For me, that's not fun. The only other thing I wanted to talk about, because I've been having a conversation with a wonderful person that has been very, very polite to me. And I'm going to butcher your name right now. I'm going to apologize to you. But to be fair, there's lots of letters in your name. So I only take 90% of the fault for pronouncing it wrong. Jamie Hughes, I want to say. If I mispronounce it, I'm very, very sorry. Jamie has been having a lovely conversation in the comments with me about the new way the two-weapon fighting works. And the reason that I disagree with their interpretation is actually from a game design perspective, and it's not the one that they've been claiming. So if anyone doesn't know, one of the new weapon mastery properties is called Nick. Weapon mastery is another thing that I'm just not really happy about with 5.5. It's an amazing idea in theory, but for 38 weapons, there are 8 mastery properties. And half of them are either completely useless or very, very situational. It's not a great system. But anyway, one of the systems, the absolute most powerful mastery property is Nick. The way that Nick works is two-weapon fighting. I'm going to actually read from the new PHP. Two-weapon fighting is no longer something that exists in the combat section, which is a pain in the ass. It's actually contained under the light property for the weapon. And this is what the light property says. When you take the attack action on your turn and attack with a light weapon, you can make one extra attack as a bonus action later on the same turn. That extra attack must be made with a different light weapon, and you don't add your ability modifier to the extra attack's damage unless that modifier is negative. And then it goes, for example, and gives an example. The for example part is really, really important. When we look at Dual Wielder and the enhanced dual wielding, uses these words. When you take the attack action on your turn and attack with a weapon that has the light property, you can make one extra attack as a bonus action later on the same turn. If anyone has caught, that is word for word the exact same sentence from the light property. It only changes after turn. Then it says, with a different weapon, which must be a melee weapon that lacks the two-handed property. So that is the only thing that changes between the two things. In game design, one of the things that's really, really essential is if you want two things to have the same effect, you need to use the same wording. Because anytime you change wording, people are going to assume the reason you are not using the words that you used before is because this is something different. Different words means different things. And that also means when you use the exact same words as a different place, it is intended that those two effects are identical, that they work the exact same way. The argument for this is normally two-weapon fighting, you use your attack action to make an attack. For a bonus action, you make another attack. Nick allows you to make that additional attack, but it's part of your attack action, leaving your bonus action open. People are arguing that, well, since enhanced dual wielding says you can make one extra attack as a bonus action later on the same turn, Nick has already freed up your bonus action, so enhanced dual wielding gives you an additional bonus action. It doesn't. It has the exact same wording as the light property. It's the exact same effect. The thing that is different is that it no longer has to be a light weapon. And they do that very, very simply. In the light weapon property, there's actually a period after later on the same turn, period. New point. That extra attack must be made with a different light weapon, and you don't add your blah, 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 blah. Here, instead of putting a period there, which would require them to add another subject to make this longer, and they've done everything they can to make this book as short as physically possible. They just didn't use a period, but they still have with a different weapon, which must be a melee weapon that lacks the two-handed property. So the only thing that's changed is the properties of the weapon, but everything else is identical. And that is how game design works for to the tabletop RPGs. So anytime you want the exact same effect to happen, you have to use the exact same words. This is, again, I'm a platinum best-selling game designer on the DM's Guild. I have friends on. I have friends who have friends on the design teams for Dungeons and Dragons. This is how it works. So as much as people claim, and I really loved the thing. Well, multiple influencers also said that D&D doesn't look at survey results, and then within 20 minutes were proven wrong. I do not trust influencers that tell me that, well, I heard. No, until it comes from Crawford itself, I believe it's a lie, a blatant lie, because having it work that way goes against everything I've learned in game design. Having it work that way breaks the game massively. Like, everything about that is just wrong. If they wanted it to work differently, to where enhanced dual wielding actually gave you an additional bonus action, they should have used different wording to do it. And that's how they've done it for a decade. As long as I've been designing, which I haven't been doing it for quite a decade, but it's how it's always worked. And that's how it works throughout the entire tabletop RPG play space. You see the exact same words. It means it's the same effect. And anytime they want a different effect, they change the wording up in some way, shape, or form. And in English, that's remarkably simple, or that's remarkably simple, because we have so many words that mean basically this is the same thing, or very similar things. So, anyway, getting back to the main subject of this. Thank you, phone. Overall, and again, I've got my in-depth review. I'm going to be uploading it as soon as I have the mental bandwidth. Overall, I guess the biggest takeaway I have from this new PHB is I do not believe that this is going to extend the lifespan of 5th edition. What I mean by that is, at the end of 4th edition, they introduced this thing called Essentials. And Essentials basically was designed to try and get new players into 4th edition, because due to rules bloat and everything, 4th edition had become really, really, really complicated. So they created this Essentials lines, and it's basically a bunch of brand new classes that were significantly more simple to play than the base classes. The only problem with the Essentials lines is for heroic tier content, levels 1 to 10, they worked really, really well. Once you got to Paragon level, which was 11 to 20, they kind of lagged behind the base classes. They just didn't have enough useful abilities to be able to compare. And once you got to epic tier content, which is 21 to 30, they couldn't compete. They were vastly underpowered. But they were designed for heroic level content, because that's where most people played 4th edition, was levels 1 to 10. So the Essentials line came out, I want to say, like maybe 2 years before they stopped supporting D&D 4th edition. And that's kind of what I see as 5.5. It does basically the same thing. It's a more simplistic version of D&D 5th edition. Everything in here is for the most part more simplistic. The wording is significantly smaller. They've taken out a lot of the ambiguity in a lot of different things to make it easier to understand. A lot of the classes, like the Barbarian, have more choices, but for the most part, they're still relatively simple choices. So I kind of see, and I mentioned this in my in-depth review as well, I kind of see this as kind of the swan song for 5th edition, which is perfectly fine. 5th edition is already, I don't know what in the world is going on. Excuse me. My nose just started running like crazy. It's weird. I don't know if maybe like dust or something. Maybe the AC kicked on and knocked a bunch of dust into my room. Anyway, the 5th edition is already going to be the longest running version of D&D ever. The only one that has been supported longer was D&D 2nd edition because it technically ran for 11 years. 5th edition's only been running to 10 years, but they have already released what they're doing for the next year. So congratulations. D&D 5th edition is the longest supported version of D&D that has ever existed. It's great. It's wonderful. It is a fantastic version of D&D. It is the most popular version of D&D since 4th edition. Another thing a lot of people don't realize, 4th edition was the best-selling version of D&D ever until 5th edition. So the idea that it was not profitable is a complete joke. It was, it just wasn't World of Warcraft, and that's what Hasbro wanted for it. So 5th edition has done great. But I don't see 5.5 as somehow extending the lifespan. I think 5.5 might get a few new people in. And I mentioned this in my in-depth review. The How to Play chapter is probably one of the best written introductions to tabletop RPGs chapters I've ever read. It is remarkably well written. I really wish that whoever wrote that chapter had consulted literally anywhere else in the book, because all of the painstaking care that they took in that chapter seems to have been completely forgotten throughout the entirety of the rest of the book. But I digress. I think it is going to be a nice entry point for people that have never played before. However, I don't see this giving 5th edition extra legs or allowing it to exist for another 10 years. I just don't. The changes here are interesting in some points, but there's other things like the weapon mastery system wasn't ready. It wasn't done. I think they pushed 5.5 out too fast. They needed at least another year or two in testing if they wanted this to really be good. But they wanted it out for the 50th anniversary, and they got it out. And what we got was a bit half-baked. There's some good ideas in here. I'm not saying that there aren't. But there's other stuff that just doesn't work. The Dual Wielder feat being a perfect example of that. There is this huge rift with people trying to understand whether or not Dual Wielder lets you make 4 attacks instead of 3. You want to know a really, really simple way they could have dealt with that? They could have put in, after you don't add your ability modifier to the extra attack's damage unless that modifier is negative, they could have just put a note in there. This attack is in addition to the regular light weapon bonus action attack if you use the Nick property. Or something like that. They could have mentioned the Nick property. Like a billion different ways that they could have clarified. By the way, this is in addition to the extra attack you get with normal light weapon property. They don't say that anywhere in there. And it would have been unbelievably simple. And throughout the introduction chapter, and even in the feat section, or in the light weapon property, again, remember, after, unless that modifier is negative, they have another thing. For example, you can attack with a short sword in one hand and a dagger in the other, using the attack action and a bonus action, but you don't add your strength or dexterity modifier to the damage roll of the bonus action unless that modifier is negative. So they understood that this is somewhat confusing, so they added an example to it. You have something that apparently is more confusing, but you don't add an example, you don't add a clarification. This is something that should have been picked up in playtesting and wasn't. So yeah, overall, stop thinking about things as nerfs and buffs. They aren't. They're just changes, and whether those changes allow you to play the way that you want is going to be an individual thing. Overall, I don't think this is the fresh of breath air that WotC wanted it to be. I think it is a last-ditch attempt to try and extend the lifespan of 5th edition, and I don't think it's going to work. 5th edition is on its downward turn, which isn't a bad thing. Again, D&D has never lasted this long before. And the next version of Dungeons & Dragons is probably going to be really cool. Again, every single version of Dungeons & Dragons has been genre-defining. People still talk about THAC0. 3rd edition changed so much of the game and created an entire market of games. 4th edition was amazing and is now being used for quite a few different games. Draw Steel takes direct inspiration from 4th edition. 13th Age took direct inspiration from 4th edition. The 2nd edition of 13th Age is doing that. You're seeing over and over and over again modern games that are taking lessons that were learned in 4th edition. So 4th edition changed the world. It just had a slight delay. And then 5th edition 100% changed the world. Critical Role wouldn't exist without 5th edition. Yeah, like 5th edition has been wonderful, has been amazing, and it's on. It is. We are seeing its swan song. And that's not a bad thing, and it doesn't mean that once 5th edition is not supported that you can no longer play it. I've played 4th edition games since 5th edition has been out. People are still playing 3rd edition games and 2nd edition games and 1st edition games and basic D&D and OD&D games. Just because they're no longer supporting it and putting out new content doesn't mean that it's not going to... you're not going to be able to play your games in it. To be perfectly honest, there's not a ton more they can add to 5th edition. You can already make almost any character you want in it. The only thing that's kind of missing is a good version of psionics, because I'm not really a fan of the feats and the few subclasses, and the Dark Sun campaign setting. Once they add those two things, 5th edition is complete. We can go on to the next one. Anyway, it's going to be all for me today. We'll see you guys in the next time, all right? Keep hitting all the wrong buttons. Bye-bye.